when we look at the nuclear question, the nuclear threat against Korea started in 1950. It was not implemented. It was the Cold War era. It was not implemented because the Soviet Union had also acquired nuclear warheads. But what is important to point out is the threat of nuclear war directed against Korea extends over a period of 63 years. It's the threat to use nuclear weapons in 1950, but more specifically and well documented is the fact that preparations for stockpiling and deploying nuclear warheads in South Korea commenced in 1956, and that they were installed in 1958, and for the next 33 years, from 1958 to 1991, there was a deployment of US strategic nuclear weapons directed against North Korea, and then in the 70s there was a South Korean nuclear weapons program, which in effect was integrated with that of the United States, but it was presented officially as something separate, and then the United States said officially they encouraged South Korea to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and to disband its nuclear weapons program, but in actuality that program was part of the joint military arrangements between the Republic of Korea and the United States, which ultimately prevail to this day, and which not only put the troops, the 37,000 troops, which are, they say it's on the UN command, but that's a bogus concept as well, but the United States actually is responsible at the upper echelons of the command structure for all the troops of the Republic of Korea. So in other words, 2 million recruits and compulsory draft and so on and so forth. It is a US general which overshadows Her Excellency, God bless her, Mrs. Park, President of Korea and Commander-in-Chief, but she is not Commander-in-Chief. The United States are not necessarily, this is not a political statement, but it's a factual statement that the US general appointed by the Pentagon ultimately decides. And that means he can decide to deploy troops, Korean troops, and send them into China. He can decide on the deployment of naval forces, Korean naval forces in Jeju Island, which so happens to be just opposite Shanghai. So we're dealing with something which is pretty fundamental. Now, with regard to nuclear weapons, the most recent figures suggest that the United States has stockpiled more than 5,000 strategic nuclear warheads.
The decision made by what is called the UN command is made by the United States. The US is not acting, I quote, as a subsidiary or representative of the UN when it acts under the name of the UN command, unquote. Yet, the first appearance given is that the US is acting under the authority of the United Nations. Therefore, the UN as a whole has even asked the US to resolve the issue of illegally and falsely use the name, the UN command. So in November 1975, the resolution number 3390B was passed by the UN General Assembly calling for negotiations between the relevant parties so that the U.S. would no longer use the misleading designation UN command to represent the U.S. military role. However, as you know, as I know, as we know, the U.S. has not fulfilled on the obligation to carry out these negotiations. I also quote, to be firm, and my short comment, at the June 21 of this year, at noon press conference by the deputy spokesman for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, a question was raised asking for Secretary General Ban's view on this issue. I quote from the deputy spokesman of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. I quote, "But the United Nations has never had any role in the command of any armed forces deployed in the Korean Peninsula. In particular, the United Nations did not at any time have any role in the command of the forces that operated in Korea under the unified command between 1950 and 1953. This is strictly a matter for the parties to the armistice agreement. The United Nations," Ban said, his spokesman, "the UN is not party to the armistice agreement," unquote.